let's have a look. Teaching Roman culture in a reading course. I thought we'd start with that image there on the right, because it's quite an interesting image. It's from London. It's an image of Boudica on her chariot. Put up at the time when the British Empire was pretty much at its height, and of course, it's in some ways it's an image. It's an image which is defying another empire. So there's quite that image works on quite a number of different ways. Let's have a look then at Roman culture, how we often talk about it. These are three of the terms that we often use when we're talking about background material or paralinguistic, or we talk about the cultural context. And I want to sort of challenge that a little this afternoon or this morning in this session. I want to think maybe we should be thinking as culture as not the background, but the foreground, rather than sitting alongside the language. Maybe we should think of the language as a way into the culture, so that, if you like, the language is support for understanding culture. And I think sometimes we feel that the language is the hard part, the challenging bit, the sort of the gritty side of things, and the culture sort of if you like, sweetens the pill. And I think it's sometimes quite good to think, well, if we're reading and learning this language, why are we doing that? What is the purpose of studying Latin? And I think there's a good case to be made for the answer, or at least one of the answers being to understand Roman culture. So in this session, I'd like to sort of question whether we can, in our teaching, make culture the focus. Probably we won't do that, but pushing things a little further, so that we sort of challenge the primacy that's often given. Start at a really basic level with just a simple word like we're. And with many of our students, if we said, well, we're means a street or a road, they might think of something like this. This is a sort of image they might have in their heads if we talk to them about a road. But perhaps we want them to have this image associated with we're. Similarly, if we say to students that mercator it means as a businessman, let's just think for a minute, what goes into our heads normally when someone says to us the word businessman? What image is conjured up? And how many of our students conjure up this image in their heads when we say, well, mercator is a businessman? Similarly with a hortus. What is a hortus? What sort of image comes into their minds when we talk about a garden? Say that I don't think you can separate out language from culture and culture from language. The two are deeply embedded, one within the other. And to a certain extent, it's an artificial exercise, isn't it, to try to separate them out. But I think it's always important to bear in mind what preconceptions the students might have when they start in our classes. So I'd like to look then at why it is that we learn to read Latin. What's the point of it? And we're so used, aren't we, to justifying ourselves and justifying our subject. But I want to ask the question here from the point of view of what are we going to do with it once we've learnt it? And I suppose the question of why learn to read Latin can be applied to any language, can't it? Why learn to read English, for example? And one of the answers that we might give to why we learn to read English or Latin is to enjoy beautiful poetry. And certainly, you know, the poetry of Latin is gorgeous and beautiful in its own right. Sometimes we might be learning to read a language because it's fun and they are just gorgeous stories, and it takes us to another place, and a place in our imagination. And sometimes, this is a speech by the British Prime Minister Tony Blair from around about a year ago. Sometimes we learn to read a language because the material that we can then read teaches us something about the individual who wrote it, their beliefs, perhaps the society within which that person lives. And therefore, I think we can make the same sorts of associations with Latin. Here's a bit of Virgil, Book 2. A very strong argument, as we were saying, for reading Latin is to enjoy the beauty of the poetry and the images that are conjured up. This is a bit of Ovid in translation, and I know not all of us, you know, certainly I couldn't look at the Ovid having not seen it and straight away go through it in my mind of what's happening. But here's a bit of Ovid in translation. The lovely story of Baucis and Philemon. There's a beautiful bit of Latin, but it also tells us quite a bit about Roman attitudes, or some Roman attitudes to gods. And here, this is a bit of Cicero Verines, and this I think is really where I want to get to, in that a speech like this from Cicero gives us a huge insight, not only obviously into what life was like in Sicily or under a provincial governor who might be rather corrupt. So all of that to say that one of the main aims for reading Latin is to use that knowledge and our reading of the text to understand about the people themselves. And a good friend of mine who worked on Cambridge back in the 70s, I always remember him saying to me, he said, Will, if space aliens came down and said, we're going to take away either Latin or Roman culture, the study of Latin or Roman culture, he said, I would choose for them to take away the study of Latin, because if we don't then use that to understand Roman culture, well, we haven't really achieved a great deal. So I think there's quite a lot in that learning the language is really important, obviously, and really interesting, but it's only part of the job. We've then got to take that language and use it to understand the people themselves. Let's see how images in our various courses that we use can help us then with that understanding. I'd like to start here by showing you what it is that we do when we're writing stories or elements for a course. We start with a text like this, and if I just color it up a little bit, you can see that from a linguistic point of view, everything here in green is neuter and everything in orange is first or second person plural. So this is part of the course where we are reviewing first and second persons plural and neuter of the second declension. So you can see linguistically that's what's going on there, and in some senses, of course, those sentences would do the trick. You don't really need a great deal more than that, you might argue. But then look what happens if we take that material and Hannah applies her magic to it. So that's exactly the same text, but a number of things have now happened. One is that it's visually much more appealing to the students. You know, if we go from the days where our textbooks might look like this, and we have a lot of sort of centered black and white in front of the students and straightforward sentences, it's not the most engaging content, even though it is actually the self-same material. So it's more beautiful, it's more appealing, and of course that helps us to engage the students. But look at what else is now in those images that isn't in the text. And this is where I really want to encourage all of us when we are using whatever course it is that's got a lot of images alongside the text to think how much more those images add. And it's so easy, isn't it, when we're teaching, or sometimes we're against the clock and there's a bit of a rush, that we go straight in and we focus on the Latin and we think, well, these are some nice pretty pictures, but that's about it. Let's focus in on that first image, and I'll just flick back for a second. So this here on that sort of double. Okay, let's focus in on it. I just want to ask you now just to look at that image for a minute, and if you've got pictures of our you know, little sort of thumbnails of us down the right hand side, you might want to minimize that for a second. Have a look in that image and just see what you can see going on. I'm going to let you have a couple of minutes for that. Okay. If this were a sort of normal face-to-face session, you know, I'd say let's all sort of go around the room and see what we've come up with. I'm not really sure how well that would work. So I'll just sort of take you through a few things that I've seen, and you may well have seen things that I've missed. One of the things that stands out for me is this couple of ladies here, and this lady is quite clearly pregnant, as is this one here. So I'm seeing that in the image. I'm seeing quite a lot of color around. I've got this somebody here seems to be carrying some vegetables of some sort. We've got someone here, I imagine an enslaved person quite possibly is carrying a crate. Could have some money in it, who knows. We've got children there playing a little game possibly of dice. People carrying, this lady here carrying some flowers. Here's somebody who seems to have a scroll, so I'm wondering to myself, is he some sort of crier, an announcer, messenger? We've got someone here on the right hand side. You may not see this if our faces are over the right hand side of your screen, but a lady getting out of a litter. So there is definitely a preponderance of women in the scene. Is that normal? Are we looking at roughly 50% of the population there, as there might be on any day, or is something happening to sort of increase the number of women and children that are around? And then we might think about the buildings. We've got somebody here, who might that be on their horse? What sort of statue there? What buildings have we got behind? Looks like there's some of these seem to be temples, aren't they? So there's a lot there to explore that we could miss entirely if we just went into, well, it's a holiday and the forum is noisy and Roman women are celebrating the Vestalia. So very often with these stories that have got a lot of images with them, what you might want to do is start with the the images rather than with the Latin. And you could do that for the entire, the spread rather than one at a time. So you can look at the whole lot. Some of the content there will relate to the Latin. So in this is Suburani in the course here. This is chapter 4, and the students have done the Roman Forum in chapter 2. So some of this would be familiar to the students, and the word clamosus is quite a familiar word to them as well. So some of the material here in the image obviously will be helping with understanding some of the Latin here. Matronae, Romani can come out of the image as well. But also a lot happening in the image that isn't in the Latin. What about this scene here? I think this is a really good example of where the image can help us understand the Latin. So tibiakinase isn't a word probably that the students will understand, but we can say, well, what have we got going on here? What are these people playing? Who are they? And get from the image to the text, but also it allows us to ask questions about what do we think of the role of these people? Why might there be pipe players walking or proceeding through the forum at this point? They're not just there to add a little bit of text. They're performing some role in this whole event. And so we're learning about culture through that image and through the text that goes with it. Here again, and we won't go through all of the images in this little scene, but here's another one. If you start this time with the Latin, you can see multa templa sunt and unum templum est. And so clearly here we're trying to play around a little bit with plural and singular neuters to help the students see how we move from a singular to a plural or vice versa. And so that's the linguistic focus there. But again, we could start by looking at the image instead and saying, well, what can we see in that image? What sorts of buildings are there? What sorts of people are there? Can you tell me anything about these buildings? Now, if you know, and I am absolutely not any form of specialist on Roman culture, but if you have time to do a little bit of research before you're teaching, and you can see, well, okay, this is going to be here, this round building is the shrine or the temple of Vesta. This is, I think, the temple of the divine Julius, and I think this is the Arch of Augustus. If I'm completely wrong, feel free to put it in the chat. But all that to say that if you have time in advance of your teaching to prepare quite thoroughly, then the images do allow you to give the students quite a sort of close, in-depth analysis of what these buildings are. Why might there be such an arch to Augustus or a temple to Julius, divine Julius? So also the other thing that these images do, I think, it's if we ever go to the forum, it's quite an open expanse, isn't it? It's very hard for the students to think that actually in reality this was probably quite a cluttered space with buildings left, right and center. So sometimes the role of these images is to provide the general feel of the area as well. I think this last one then we'll look at here for the Vestalia, but here's a shot inside the temple of Vesta. Very interesting here. First of all, we know it's a round temple, but look also at who is inside. It's not just the Vestal Virgins. We've also got individual women and girls who aren't priestesses, and that's quite unusual, isn't it? And we've also got in there this fire burning in the center. So it's a great opportunity to say to students, okay, well, look, who do we think these people are? Who do you know? Great question. Who do you notice isn't there? There are no men in this scene. What can we deduce about what's going on? What does that suggest about this particular event? We looked briefly at this scene earlier on, and this in Suburani is the very start of chapter 2, where we're looking at characters coming into Rome. I just want you to look at that image and see what there is to see and ask about. And I think in teaching, one of the most important things is thinking carefully about exactly the questions that we ask. Now, very often, I don't know the answers to the questions I want to ask, but I don't think that's a reason not to ask them. And I think particularly if you're not a Latin specialist or a classic specialist, you might feel, well, gosh, classic specialists know all of this stuff. I have to say, colleagues and I went to great universities. We studied Latin classics for a long time at school, went to great universities. I came out knowing practically nothing about Roman daily life. So it isn't the case that there are people out there who know all of these details. It is really a question of digging around, finding out, and asking questions. And it is completely fine, I think, to ask questions that of the students that we ourselves don't always know the answers to. Because one of the things that certainly I'm trying to do in my class is to generate interested students who will be happy to ask questions and quite comfortable with the fact that very often either we ourselves don't know the answer or the answers aren't known. Anyway, I'll be quiet for a minute. I just want you to look at that image and see what questions you might have based on that image, whether or not you can answer those questions. Okay, I'm now going to, I don't know whether you can see the little thumbnail of me, but I'm just going to hold up. There's roughly, in the teacher's notes that we've put together for this, there's roughly a side of notes and ideas. And I just want to sort of run through some of the questions that we have asked and sometimes answered. But here are some of those questions. Who and what can we see on the road? What materials and goods are being taken into Rome? How are the different goods and materials being transported? And then we've got a little note, we say closest to Rome, someone is carrying a large basket on his or her head, might be containing eggs, which were delicate to transport. There's a cart shown transporting poultry hanging by their feet. There's a covered cart, might possibly contain fruit. And then an ancillary question, if it does, what sort of fruits did the Romans have? What didn't they have? Again, we may or may not be able to answer these questions. We might want to go and do some research into it. And in some senses, the point is just getting the students interested and intrigued. The cart closest to us is carrying wood. What could that be for? Is it fuel for hypercourse or some wealthy home? The lady nearest us is carrying amphorae. How is she carrying them? How heavy might they be if she's carrying them? What might those amphorae have in them? We can't possibly know what those amphorae have got in them, but some options that we've put here are there could be wine, olive oil, dried fruit, possibly even fish. Why might different animals be in use there? And we can see the different animals that are in that image. So it looks to me, and you might again correct me, we've got some oxen. It looks like up ahead there's a donkey. The animal on the right, on the left, looks to be a horse. And again, here's another couple of questions that can't possibly answer, but great for the students to think about. What do the students imagine the lives of the people in that scene are like? And what do they imagine the lives of the animals are like? Now, you might say, look, well, this has got nothing at all to do with chapter 2, which is about nominative and accusative. And you're right, but you know, if what we're doing here is studying a language to try to understand the people, then asking questions about the people that we see and imagining what their lives might be like, I think is really valid and interesting and intriguing. And it also allows students who might be struggling with the linguistic side of the language, it allows those students to engage with, you know, their own ideas here, where, you know, everybody can have interesting ideas. Other questions we've got here is, where does this road lead? Where might the people and their goods be coming from? We've said maybe local villages and farms. What does the image tell us about the materials and goods which Rome needed to function? What would happen if these goods didn't come in to Rome? Well, probably in the case of these individuals, not a lot, but we can easily shift to the grain supply to Rome and think what would happen if that grain supply, as it occasionally did, stopped getting through. What about Rome's relationship with its wider environment? And here we can see goods coming in by road, but how else did goods get into Rome? And then we can look at Ostia and the river and so on. Other questions we've put here: what elements of the natural environment can the student see? So the natural environment here, a river. You can only just see a tiny bit of it, but I think because I've sort of cropped a little bit. The river, the open green space, the hills. Does anybody know anything about those hills on which Rome is built, and so on? Why might the Romans have wanted a big open space just outside the city? And then looking more closely towards Rome, what elements of the built environment can the students see? We've got aqueducts, we've clearly got some large public buildings, including temples on the top of one of those hills. Now, we might know a bit about, you know, those temples and what that particular hill is. There's appear to be some defensive walls. There's residential buildings there, aren't there, in Insulae. There's the stone bridge that they're walking over, and there's the road itself. And then you can go from those to say, okay, well, if the Romans have built these things, would that have been quick to build each one of these things, like the road and the bridge, and the aqueduct and these temples, or would that have been time consuming? Would it have been cheap or expensive? What does the decision to build those items tell us about the Romans' priorities? And we can also ask, I think, who do the students think did do the actual physical building of these bridges and roads and aqueducts and so on? And that can lead us into other discussions of other areas of society. So all of that from one image out of many, many, many images. And I'm not saying, look, you know, really we must spend 20 minutes on every image, but I'm just saying that there's a huge amount of potential if we almost relax a little bit and allow ourselves to be comfortable asking questions we don't know the answers to, or if we are curious and ask, well, what might this be? What might this other thing be? And so on. Then we may not be able to answer all of those questions, but we'll certainly be able to answer quite a few, and hopefully there'll be some intriguing things along the way. Here, a little bit later on, we can see that alongside this road along which they're traveling, we've got some various types of tombs. And again, let's look at this image here. What can we understand about Roman culture from that image? Look at the size of those tombs, look where they're positioned. There seems to be somebody actually living inside one of them. So again, you know, we won't go into all the details there, but there's loads we can do beyond comparing the nominative of pauper with the accusative of it. Here's a great scene set in a kitchen. I am the last person to know the details of all of this, but those of you who have a better understanding of plants and food than I do might be able to pick out all sorts of things there. And of course, we can see the different meats and the different people in preparation and so on. So the Latin is reviewing future tense a little bit there, and it's getting ready to actually later on go into a statement. But the cultural potential of that image is really huge. Let's look at another area here. Well, this is mining. And I want to just show a little bit how sometimes courses will will use uh, the Latin to help give a sort of a first step into if you like, the primary and secondary material, and sometimes that primary and secondary material will be a great starting point for the Latin stories. So there's not really a right and wrong with that. I would say do whatever you feel like doing in terms of which you start with. This is the Roman gold mine in now northern Spain, Las Medulas. And I want to just show you that, just focus in on that bottom picture there, because that used to be one big mountain until the Romans, they didn't sort of blow it up, but they destroyed it. Their term was the ruina montium, the ruin or destruction of the mountains. So that would, imagine that all being one mass, and then gradually they brought it down. And here's a part of a story where the story itself explains how that works. And if you look on this is a double page spread, cropped slightly. If you look at the bottom left, you can see people here tunneling. And then, rather surprisingly, they're not tunneling really to get at the gold in a way that we might have done with sort of coal mining. They are tunneling to weaken the structure of the mountain. And then here we can see, so the Latin says they're sort of hollowing out the mountain. Here we can see that actually, once they've hollowed it out, they whack out, they knock down the supporting beams, and then they have to run for it. Because when they do that, they would then flood the mountain if it didn't collapse on its own right. And this, if you like, here now, where we've got antea and postea, here we've got an image where this mountain is still intact, and then after they knock out the post and run and maybe flood it, then the whole thing collapses. So this is a part of this course. Again, this is Suburani. This is part of the course where the story is explaining to somebody exactly how a particular process worked. Okay. We won't do too many more of these. This is the last chapter, and you can see from the title, Nuptiae, this is really the focus here is on weddings, and the main topic is going to be weaving and cloth and so on. And again, you can imagine there's all sorts you can do with those images before you go anywhere near the text. Loads of things going on there. And again, I'm not somebody who knows anything about weaving, but from teacher's notes and from looking online and so on, you can soon find out some basic principles. But actually, I want to sort of step away from the weaving side of things and just look at sort of very boring Roman brick that has got somebody's name on it, Arwe Milo. So this is a piece of evidence that we used to establish that there was somebody there who was involved in brick making or running a factory called Milo. So we made him one of our characters, and there he is, top right. So in this scene, which is predominantly about weaving and marriage and so on, you can see there in the middle, there's a little snapshot of brick making. Now, brick making might not ever be on the top of anybody's list of priorities of things to find out more about. But if we want to know what life was really like day to day for the working poor in the Roman world, then it's exactly the sort of thing where we need to have a little bit of an understanding. And of course, for many of our students, then this sort of physical activity actually is much more appealing than information about pronouns. So let's just have a little look at that image there. I was, until sort of 48 hours ago, no expert on Roman brickmaking. I'm still not, but there's all sorts of questions we can raise, aren't there, about that scene, what's going on. And it's only a little one tiny scene on the page, so it's not necessary to really draw attention to it, but all sorts of things going on here. So we seem to have a pile of clay there. Then this individual, who's probably enslaved, is stamping it down a little bit, as Hannah said to me, like sort of, you know, maybe like treading grapes or treading clothes to clean them. But that's happening there. He's doing that to get out any big chunks to sort of to thin it out a little bit. Then these guys here are adding a bit of water to it and stirring it up. Then this lady is taking the damp clay and forming it into bricks. So super mundane. Not particularly the most exciting thing in the world, but you know, again, just with that little one image there, the students, we can, if you like, increase their understanding and our own understanding about Roman culture and how things worked. And one of the things that Hannah said to me while we were looking at this is that the Romans needed to put their bricks, because they've added this water to them, before they put them in a kiln to fire them. They needed to put them out in the sun to dry a bit, and because of that, brick making was probably a seasonal activity. So, you know, all of that from just a tiny little aside. Where really the main focus is going to be weaving. Okay, that's all images. Let's have another look at the way we can bring culture in and maybe foreground it. Let's have a look at this. This is just a few lines about a dinner. I just want you to imagine that this was a primary source about the Roman world. What could you deduce about a Roman cana from these few lines here? Okay, well, some things we might pick out. Look at the time. What time were they eating? How many people were gathered together? What about this recumbibat? Now, we all know, don't we, the Romans recline to eat, but if the students don't, then that's a way in for them there. Recumbibat, they were reclining. What's going on here? What form of entertainment arrives? So within 3 lines, we've got the time, the number, how they ate, something about entertainment, and then down here towards the end, we've got one character saying to another, consume glires et plus vini bibe. So, glis dormais, well, that's then picked up. And again, if in the course that you're using, there are, you know, photos, images, and so on at the bottom of the page, they're not there normally just as a bit of fill. You might want to start with those images to set some sort of context. But all that to say is that we can use our stories as sources of information about the Roman world. How do we know anything about the Romans? Well, either through their text or through artifacts they've left behind. Just here, just to show you that actually that was sort of that dormouse was set up there in a little introductory passage before that. Okay. What I want you to do now, and we don't have a vast amount of time, but just have a quick look at this. This is a story Druid Days about the Druids. Have a look at that and imagine this was our only source for the Druids. What would we know about the Druids based on that source? And I should say that all the characters mentioned are Roman, other than Katia, who is a Briton. Okay, let's start having a look. Let's imagine this was our only source about the Druids, and we wanted to interrogate this to try to find out as much as we could about the Druids. Well, let's have a look. What does Gisco say? Gisco says, multi plincitates Britannici pugnare nolebant. So lots of British chieftains or leaders didn't want to fight because they were interested in peace. But the Druids were often used to incite these young Britons to war. So the Druids, then we're learning, were the cause of some of their wars. Okay, that's what Indus is saying. Sabina says, did you ever see any of these Druids? And this character Indus says, well, when I lived in Batavia, I didn't see them. But in Britain, just as in Gaul, there were loads of them. Well, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it tells us that these Druids that the students might think were just in Britain, actually, they're not a particularly British thing or sort of group of people associated with this landmass. Actually, they are more widespread in the empire throughout Gaul, but they weren't everywhere. They're not all the way over there in Germania. All right, now Katya says, well, they used to settle arguments between people and groups of people. And we find out that they were also priests. And in Silvi Sacris ingen simulacrum vimeum facebant and in simulacrum captuas pelebant. Right, so notice that was Katia there saying that they used to settle arguments. So she's the Briton, and then in comes another Roman. Well, I want to be a little bit cautious about calling Gisco a Roman. He's really North African heritage, but I think you get what I mean. He's not from Britannia. And he says, well, they were priests and they used to drive captives into these wicker, into a wicker image or a wicker man, really. And then they would set it on fire. And the captives used to cry out, but it was no good. And when Rufina says what happened, well, they all perished, as one would expect. And Faustus, another Roman, says, well, this isn't what you're saying is incredible. So some of the things we're learning here then about the Druids are, they used to settle arguments. They were possibly responsible for goading the young men into fighting against the Romans. That they were priests. That they would apparently sort of burn people alive, and we might know some of the reasoning behind that, or at least Caesar's explanation of it. And then look what Katia says here. Katia, after she heard what her husband had to say, said, well, fabulous, this is nonsense. Druids weren't cruel. And then they started having an argument. And this passage operates at a couple of levels, isn't it? One, it is giving us some information, but at another level, it's saying, well, the Romans might have been saying these things about the Druids, but actually a Briton completely disagreed with that, and that allows us to talk to students about how much we can trust our Latin original text when we read them. What might be the reason why a particular author has a particular sort of a slant on things, and is it reliable? I think because time is a little bit against us, we might go fairly quickly through here. But again, I just wanted us to look at this text, imagine it's a source for Roman weddings. What can we understand about the Roman world and a Roman wedding from this? And probably there isn't time to really allow you to look at it yourselves, I'm afraid, sorry. But let's just pick out one or two things. So it's Alexander and Sabina getting married. And we see here then, Sabina, what was she wearing? Well, tunicam albam, flammeum quae, so a white tunic and the bridal veil. What have we got here? We've got some enslaved people, and they had led a pig to an altar. So it seems that there's a pig involved in a sacrifice, and so on. And we've got some of the phrases that are associated with marriages. Again, you look in the notes and it will say we've got to be a little bit cautious, but all sorts of things coming out there to help the students understand what a Roman marriage looked like. Yes, it's all Latin. Yes, we can pull it apart for a linguistic point of view, but actually, if you like, sort of analyzing it for its language and what it, how it means what it means is the first step. The next step is to then take that understanding and say, okay, well then what does it tell us about the Roman world? And again, very often in whatever course you use, there'll be an image there that will then be picking up on a lot of those things that had been stated in the text. Okay, final thing to say on this front of using the text as a source, that sometimes little phrase like this, Incapitation tres literae. This is a scene, quite a sort of difficult scene in many ways, where an enslaved person is being tortured, and he is branded on his forehead. Actually, you know, we often tell the students, don't we? Well, enslaved people who ran away were branded FUG. Actually, we were not able to find any evidence at all that those three letters were FUG. So the text here is being pretty careful in what it says and also what it doesn't say. And I think sometimes that's important. Okay, very quickly, using primary and secondary sources, very often these courses come with quite a few pages of ancillary, if you like, material. You could say it's the core material from what I was saying earlier. How do we approach it? Well, I think my main one bit of advice would be to say, do the stuff. So rather than just reading about wool and weaving, have a little go at it. You know, it's not that hard to knock up a little bit of a bit of wool with a thread and have a go at spinning a bit of wool in the class. Okay, it might take a bit of time one Saturday afternoon to put all the bits and pieces together, but I can absolutely guarantee you, if we try some practical things in the classroom, students are going to absolutely love Latin, because it's not just going to be cases and verbs and so on, all of which are important, but it's actually also going to be hands-on practical for those students who like doing things. So yeah, if you've got something like that in your course, have a go at it. If you've got in your course something about meals and food and cooking, get the students to give it a shot. Try it out. It might taste absolutely horrendous, but they will absolutely love it and remember it. And if you can get in touch with the food technology department and put something on together where you go down there and try something all together as a class, brilliant. Again, the students are going to really enjoy that. Creating mosaics, well, who hasn't created mosaics in class from time to time? And it doesn't have to be, very carefully cut pieces. It can just be little bits of, of magazine and so on, can't it? But even better if you can get little bits of stone and the students have a go at creating mosaics. And then, you can do a little bit in class, and then at home, goodness knows what they're going to come up with. Similarly, making bread in the Roman style. Why not have a go at that? I can guarantee that if I tried it, it would be a disaster, but the students would absolutely love doing practical. So I think my main piece of advice for the cultural material there is see whether you can't actually give it a go. And I used to teach with somebody who would, when students were studying about the haruspics, would bring in a pig's liver for the students to have a look at. Here, there's a little scene, in the bottom right there, where one of the characters is pointing out the flight of birds. If you're doing augury, or it comes up at all in your course, pop outside and have a look and see what the birds are doing. I've tried that often. Normally what happens is actually there are no birds around at all. I have no idea what that suggests about the future, but it's always good to get out there, and it makes the students remember it so much more. Okay, let's make this the last thing, and then we can do a few questions. Let's just have a look at this source. primary source here. How would we use that in the classroom, I wonder? All sorts of things that come out of that, aren't they? You know, we could go into a discussion based just on line 1. Do the students agree that money is the cause of life stress, or the pursuit of it, perhaps? Do they agree with that? Do they disagree? Why? What experiences have they had, or do they know that others have had? And so on. What about this people losing their life at sea? Maybe we don't want to go there. Maybe that's a bit difficult in some situations for some people. But you know, why is that a particularly difficult idea to sort of to come to terms with? So all sorts we could do with that. I think for me, I love to take a source like that with the students and discuss it and see how they feel about it. The images that are created, this in the middle here, for In Pursuit of You, the poor boy lost his life at a young age and now floats as unfamiliar food for far off fish. I mean, in many ways, that's horrendous, isn't it? A horrendous image. And yet, you know, such a real situation. Actually, for many people, we see people in the UK coming to our shores in tiny little boats, and you know, very often people don't make it. It's, you know, it's harrowing, it's difficult, but sometimes the study of Roman culture then is a great way of understanding our own culture a little more. Right, as always, I've talked far too much, so I'm going to stop and see if, I mean, you know, probably no one's got any questions at all and just wants to end, but do we have questions? Yeah, Molly, do you want to pop your microphone on?
Yeah, sorry, I'll turn my fan off. I've needed it on, otherwise I can't physically breathe. I love this course, so I didn't realise, and I didn't know anything about this course. I'm about to be a trainee teacher, so I don't really know. But this is fabulous. I love the amount of women and the ethnic diversity. It's brilliant. What struck me is just the practicality of time, because we've been told that sometimes you can only get 2 years to get these kids to GCSE, and often people's first instinct is, well, don't do the culture at the end unless it's in the GCSE spec.
Yeah.
So how would you recommend balancing that?
It's, you know, it's sort of pay unto Caesar what is due to Caesar, isn't it? If you know, the really hard bottom line is, if your job depends on the kids' grades, and this is a UK situation where we're, you know, we're told Fred has to get an A or whatever. If you look at it and you say, I just can't teach anything that isn't on the exam syllabus, then you've got to do that, because the kids won't thank you and their parents won't thank you, the school won't thank you, if you've spent 17 hours looking at Roman brickmaking and they're completely experts on that and really love it and have made fantastic bricks, but utterly fail their GCSE. So, you know, that's the hard reality. Or is, I think I would, whatever course I'm using, the timescale I've got, I look and think, right, I need this amount of time to cover the literature. That means I've got this amount of time, you know, and so I then know I need to do 28 chapters in however many hours of teaching. So I've got this many hours per chapter. Does that make sense? So I look at my whole course, work out how many hours per chapter I've got, and then I think, right, that means that, yeah, sadly, most of the time I'm going to be dealing with the stuff we've got to do, but I am going to have some time when we can do stuff that we can do. And that might mean that, you know, on one chapter we don't do anything fun, but then we've got an hour and a half where we can have a go at weaving, or, you know, make our own sort of bit of garum and force somebody to try it and so on. I think we've got to do some of those things, because if we don't ever do any of those things, it's just dull.
Yeah.
You know, and then if it's dull, the kids don't come back. So I think there's that. There's always I've often used to take kids on trips on a Saturday, for example. So there's that sort of thing. You can say, okay, well, we'll go to this place and we'll do some hands-on stuff that's associated with this, and it's in your own time, and not everybody comes, and sometimes it's financially challenging and all of that sort of thing. But I think, that is, what I wouldn't do is always say, read the cultural stuff yourself, because it really downgrades it. It's then saying that doesn't matter. And I think, if the kids come out with an A, but they don't really or a 9 or whatever it might be, and they don't love and understand the Roman world, then I'd put that down as a fail myself. So
I was going to
yes.
say, you just put something in the chat that I thought I'll bring up, just put it in the chat. It sounds brilliant. Could you do it as half-termly projects or a couple of homework to have them be like, right, this group of people do, go and research this on your own and present it almost? Yeah,
great. Yeah, and you could say, if you're covering a few topics that half term, you could say, right, who loves doing, who loves jewelry, who loves, building things, and then you can put things together. Okay, you guys do a project on this, you maybe weave a tapestry, you guys do some make a mosaic, and you show the class how you've done it. Great. I'm always a little cautious about it being off at home and not given that sort of time in the class, but whatever we can do. Sometimes having a day in school, and say, okay, why don't we come in, we have a hands-on day. And sometimes I've been able to say to head teachers, look, this inset day that's coming up, it's deathly boring. I've heard about how to use Excel 5,000 times. Can I have the kids in, and can we do something, and the head teacher doesn't always know whether it's necessary for the exam. So, you can say, this is really, really important that we have some time to do this thing. And, it's going to help the kids. It's going to motivate them. So important in that sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Anybody else got questions, queries? Anyone disagree with things? I can't see everybody's faces. I think most of us are on. Yeah, Chris.
Is it clear or?
Yeah, it is now. Yeah.
It is now. Okay, good. I just wanted to say one extra thing. I'm obviously using the illustrations and trying to really demonstrate to the kids so what's in the background and to actually look at these details. I found over the last term, when I've been using the online version, that if after the first story, if I was giving that kind of help for the students, sort of talking them through all of the bits in the background, I found that they then didn't look any further than the things that I've mentioned. Whereas when I'd set it, when I'd given them more help with the unillustrated stories, and then set them off to sort of, right, now do the comic book version, that one, unaided essentially, they were coming back to me and saying, oh yes, and we saw this in the background, we noticed this in the background of the picture, and things like that. So it's I think there's a danger of doing too much explanation actually with some of this. So
you're saying, Chris, sort of sit back a bit and allow them to go for it themselves?
Yeah, but you'd have to sort of demonstrate or model it first with some other resources at the beginning. But yeah, certainly asking questions that you don't know the answer to, that's something I'm very hesitant about still, and I need the encouragement to go for it. So yeah, thanks very much, Will.
Sure. I think that's really interesting, Chris. So saying, sort of just sit back, let them. I suppose it's like anything, isn't it? If we overdo it, then it's the last thing they then want to do. On that question of just asking questions that we don't know the answers to, I think it's, I suppose I've taught for such a long time and I've made so many hundreds of thousands of mistakes. I don't mind actually the students knowing that I don't know things. And the Roman world it's like the modern world, isn't it? So vast. There are so many different aspects to it. I think it's unreasonable for us to think that we ought to know every detail about everything. It's undoable. And certainly, you know, when we've sort of asked experts in particular areas about bits and pieces, well, of course, they know their particular thing. They don't have a clue about the stuff that belongs to an expert in another area. So, I don't think we should hit ourselves over the head about that. And particularly, I think also, if you're not a classic specialist, don't think that those of us who are classic specialists know these things, because you know, often our degrees are in, you know, Greek philosophy, or you know, sort of early Minoan archaeology. It's not going to help us with a lot of this stuff. So I think we're all in that same boat. Cool. Hannah, were there any questions or things in the chat that we should pick up?
No, it was all just people saying how interested they were, so that's good.
Great. Okay. Well, look, whatever course, you know, because I know some people use Cambridge, some use Eke, some use Suburani. Whatever course it is, you know, I would just say dig around for those things, and yeah, and maybe think about what sometimes we call the background actually being the foreground. Cool. Well, hopefully well, first of all, thanks everybody for giving up an hour of, I know for some people it's holidays, some of us in the US are already back, aren't we? So thanks for giving up your time. If you're looking at this now or catch up, as always, if you've got any questions, feel free to email us. Hannah really is the expert on all the drawings. So I think you might get quite a few questions, Hannah, over coming up. Well, what's this thing here? But I have to say, Hannah's put so many hours and hours and hours and hours of detail into them. And I know also in Cambridge, there was a lot of detail in those images there as well. And I'm sure in Eke. So whatever course you're using, you know, do sort of dig around. And I think then Thursday we're doing a session on ideas for different ideas of looking at stories, and then next week we've got a couple of things as well. So hopefully see some of you. Oh, what we should say also, this will be recorded and it will go up on, you know, on the page where you do the booking. But if you don't see, when you, let's say you go tomorrow and you don't see any change, just hit refresh on your browser a few times, because we changed the page, but it doesn't, obviously, if your page is cached, you might not see the revised version. So cool. Okay, cheers everybody, good to see you all.